Election Day is 9 days away, but the voting is already happening. Where is America headed? And what are the big races that have languished in the long shadow from the top of the ballot? And the feds are on the case in Macomb County. Is there more to come? Today is Sunday, October 30th, 2016, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. You know, heading toward Halloween in the midst of a hot election always reminds me of a great political cartoon I once saw. A woman is horrified to find an enormous Frankenstein at her door on Halloween, and she says, "Aren't you a little old to be trick-or-treating?" And the Frankenstein says, "Oh, I'm not trick-or-treating. I'm here to ask you to vote for me on Tuesday, okay?" There are more than a few voters who are afraid of the candidates at the door, but nonetheless, vote we must. And between early and absentee voting, the balloting is already well underway. Is it already decided? Or does one more WikiLeaks or one more woman coming forward or the FBI making an announcement, does any of that have the capacity to knock the whole thing over? And what does all of the intense focus at the top of the ticket mean for the races and issues further down the ballot? Some big questions are going to be decided with relatively little public discourse. So ahead this morning, the underrated and the under-discussed matters awaiting your decisions. And a corruption investigation in Macomb County has residents and political leaders alike wondering who's next. Just how deep does it all go? It's all coming this morning on Flashpoint. A little more than a week to go and the hits keep on coming. Now the FBI says its closed email investigation is back open. Does any of this matter at this point? Good place to start this morning with our roundtable. Good to have with us again Detroit Free Press columnist Brian Dickerson is here. Darcy McConnell is back with us from McConnell Communications. Dennis Darnoy with us again, political consultant with Rev 6 Data Systems, and syndicated political cartoonist and columnist Henry Payne with us as well. Thank you all, gang, for very much being here. Dennis, I'd like to start with you because you've been watching these absentee vote totals that so far that we're already seeing, and I think we all wondered how much enthusiasm anybody had to vote in this. And I think what you're finding is it's not all that different from typical years so far. No,
it's not. It's very similar to what we've seen in 08 and 12 in terms of the early vote. Very robust activity across partisan lines. Traditionally, you see more female voters than males. That tradition is holding as well. So yeah, it's shaping up to be very traditional.
If it stays what does that end up meaning then? Ultimately in Michigan?
Right now in Michigan, you're probably going to see somewhere around 37% of the overall vote cast before Election Day. So a lot of these things that you're talking about may not have the big impact or the big wow factor that some people would expect.
The FBI makes its announcement, Brian, on Friday, and maybe a third or more of the vote has already been cast.
If you've got something up your sleeve and you haven't shared it with the voting public yet, it might be too late.
We had wondered, we've all talked about an October surprise of some kind in a year that seems custom built for that sort of thing. What do you expect in this last week?
I think we're looking at acts of God now. I think certainly the people running the campaigns understand what time it is as well as anybody in the press does. And if, as I said, if they have something up their sleeve, they know the time has passed to show their cards. I think I'm out of the forecasting business, but I'm really much more interested at this point in what's happening lower on the tickets, not only in the congressional races, but even at the state legislative level. The White House is getting involved in that this year, which they've never done before. And I think there is going to be a lot of significant movement at the local level that we're not paying any attention to.
We're going to talk a little bit later on this morning about the down ticket ramifications. Darcy, it's funny, I was thinking this week that if any of the other mainline Republican candidates had been a candidate at this point, like say John Kasich, he would, I get the sense, probably be up maybe by 10 in the polls. If Bernie Sanders was the Democrat, he might be up by 10 in the polls over Trump. We ended up with the two candidates who really could only beat each other. It's an interesting place where we've arrived.
Well, and that's what's intriguing about this. If the numbers are mirroring, you would think that the numbers would be down significantly, right? Because the enthusiasm has waned. And so that will still make for some kind of interesting numbers on Election Day. There's got to be some kind of pull that's happening that maybe we're not seeing or aware of.
And in fact, it could turn out to be that maybe that 37%, we won't know what the absentee portion is until all the votes are cast, but it could be almost historically high, the people who voted early. Which brings me to you, Henry, and we've watched your...
Hey, Devin.
Yes, we've watched your internal struggle with what a conservative is to do in a year like this. How you doing? Well, just check your pulse first.
It's tough. Yeah, I mean, this is very much a race between not only two unpopular candidates, but more of a split in the Democratic Party, where you have a coastal elite candidate in Hillary Clinton and a middle America blue-collar candidate in Trump. And he's not talking about the issues, Obamacare regulation, that are of interest to me as a voter that affected me. I'll give you just a real quick story. I was out in LA this week talking to a cop, a Hispanic cop in Compton. Tough neighborhood, like a lot of inner city neighborhoods in this country, has seen a surge in crime as the Obama administration and Black Lives Matter has conducted this war on cops. Very uncomfortable guy. Obama comes into town this week, flies in, goes to a Kimmel show and to 2 Bel Air fundraisers with his billionaire buddies. Totally ignores what's going on the ground in Los Angeles. You know, I mean, there's real frustration, real pain in this country. And people are looking for an alternative. They got Trump and Hillary. They have Trump and Hillary.
What he's done for cities, I mean, I think that's pretty hyperbolic. I mean, he's done some historic things when it relates to the criminal.
Look at Compton. Look at Compton and Watts right
there. There are clearly problems, Dennis, but I also found a really interesting graphic this week that really caught my attention. Looking at the swing state, the battleground states of Ohio, North Carolina, and Florida. In all of those states, unemployment right now is about half of what it was when Barack Obama took over.
Sure.
And I guess I found myself wondering, is the narrative that actually even Hillary Clinton has been peddling, that we've got to put people back to work and we've got to get America moving and working again, is that sort of a narrative that really isn't there? Are their lives better than they were?
Maybe from a numerical standpoint you could argue that, but you also get this sense, how do you feel about your life? Do you feel that you've benefited from economic gain versus your neighbors or someone else? And I think what you see in that state is, even though there are improved numbers, people don't feel that their lives have individually improved.
Which is, Darcy, that's Tip O'Neill's great quote, you know, all politics is local. It really does boil down to what's going on in your life. But now I'll let you get back to
Well, no, I was just going to say, on that note, I think that both can be true in this respect, that, you know, we know what happened in Michigan with the manufacturing industry. We know that there's been shifts industry-wise that maybe we haven't fully caught up with yet. So a lot more people may be back to work, but are the wages enough to make for a real quality of life? And I think that's maybe where the gap is coming in.
And Henry, I'm not sure why President Obama didn't stop to talk to your friend in Compton, but I'm pretty sure Donald Trump isn't going to carry Compton.
Look, I'm no Trump fan. I'm just saying people out there are looking for leadership, and you know, talking to this officer, he's frustrated.
You know, but going back to what Olive said and Brian said, what will be interesting from a numbers standpoint is, do Republicans down ticket perform higher than the top of the ticket?
Yeah.
Traditionally, you look for coattails, but we may find in Michigan this year that Republican state reps or county executives run higher than the top of the ticket, and that would be an interesting number to watch.
That would be an extraordinary thing to see, wouldn't it? People paying more attention to the bottom. Brian, before we get to the break, what do you suppose the ramifications have been down ticket, given that we have spent so much time talking about one race?
Every pollster I talk to tells me privately that they have no idea who's going to vote this year. And that's the, that's the basis of all polling. So until we can answer that question, we don't know. I do know that that's going to have maybe as big an impact on the political future of this country over the next 4 years, and indeed the decade beyond 2020, as what happens in the presidential race.
Got to get to a quick break. We'll continue with this and also look into the problems that are popping up in Macomb County, where the feds have been moving in with abandon. We'll be right back. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. We get to Macomb County in a minute. Before, though, we leave this down ticket issue, I want to talk about specifically, Darcy, the ramifications in Detroit. We've got some really huge questions being decided. RTA,
community benefits.
The community benefits, the CBAs, which we have two oddly competing proposals, and school board elections.
Right. So, yeah, historically, the wisdom says, you know, people have too much they don't understand and they vote no, as Brian was saying. But if you look at what happened when we had all of those ballot proposals across the state, Detroit was the only place where they did vote yes, right? Everything else died outstate, but in Detroit they voted yes. So I still think that there's a good shot that RTA will pass. I don't know which version of the community benefits will pass, though, because it's, like you said, it's pretty muddled.
It's very strange. I find it difficult to see people voting against something titled a community benefits.
Right, but there's two that
But there's
say that.
two competing ones. And the school board situation where you've got 63 candidates, 2/3 of whom barely could be bothered to fill out a questionnaire.
So that means probably name ID wins again, and more likely you'll see the same people that are on the board now, as toothless as the board is, get reelected.
Well, it's going to have teeth, though, soon, so that's what I mean. There are real ramifications here coming up. I want to talk about what's been going on in Macomb County. Henry, we've been watching the story that's come back to me is that people are really walking around on eggshells in a lot of the county offices around, wondering who's next and where this is all going.
Well, I guess now we know why Comey had to drop the FBI investigation into Hillary, because you got worse corruption up in Macomb County. There's a lot of pay-for-play going on in this country, from Washington to Macomb, and they've got wires on these officials. I mean, that's bringing the full force of FBI. So it's pretty powerful stuff. What we're reading as they go through these supervisors and this official. So it sounds like they got lots more to come.
Dennis, any thoughts on where all this is going?
You know,
it's
not a good year for democracy. You know, public servants.
Let me take a moment to tweet that.
Yeah, public servants and those running for office have not really done, you know, our system of government very well. And as you said, I mean, pay to play is rampant. It's not just here in Michigan. You hear stories elsewhere, and it's an issue. So, you know, hopefully at the end of the election we can come together and kind of refresh it one way or the other.
Devin, it has been a good year, and maybe even a good 4 years, for a woman named Barbara McQuaid, the U.S. attorney.
U.S. attorney here, yes,
Detroit,
yes.
Who's been very quietly building a pretty impressive resume. I don't know if she has any interest in elective politics, but I don't know a candidate in either party who would want to run against her for attorney general or governor. And she could also very easily show up in the Clinton Justice Department over the next 4 years.
Kind of has that new sheriff in town sort of thing. Darcy, where do you suppose all this goes? Or is this just sort of a small capsule of... I remember having a conversation years ago with the late Ed McNamara, who basically said, look, this is how government works. Contributors get benefits. I mean, you know, that we all kind of need to grow up a little bit, was almost the way he described it at the time. But
well,
I'm not sure that that's...
Let's be clear, you know, until the campaign finance system changes, there's always going to be an issue about that, and at least the appearance of that, regardless. You know, this person gave X amount of money, they end up with a contract, and then, you know, do you connect the dots or not? I think part of the question will be about the company itself. You know, they service a lot of municipalities across the state, so does this investigation widen to other areas, including Detroit, that has a 5-year deal with that company, right? But, you know, clearly they are making a stance on public corruption, so.
Interesting times in Macomb County, Brian. I cannot believe the amount of money that is being spent on the water race there between Candace Miller and Anthony Morocco.
You would guess they were running for the United States Senate.
I've never seen anything like it.
And I assume that it will drive numbers for a lot of candidates higher on the ticket too in that race.
I should point out that we have tried time and again on Flashpoint to get the two of them, both of those, because the suspicions and the critiques that have been cast in those ads that you've seen a million times have been very, very deep and profound. Could not get the two of them to sit down here, unfortunately, and talk about it. Barely even return the calls. But Dennis, this is crazy to see that kind of money spent at a race at that level. I don't imagine you see this. I've seen this often in your career.
Not at all. But to Brian's point, we're seeing absentee numbers, applications in Macomb go through the roof. I mean, they're higher than what they were in 08. They're higher than what they were at 12. I mean, you 136% higher than what they were. So
in this election that we thought people might want to sit out.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think you're seeing a lot of activity on both sides, R&D, in that Macomb race, and you do wonder why is so much money going to a water commissioner race.
All right, when we come back, we're gonna talk about the underrated, undiscussed issues. We'll build on this theme that we've had here. Gang, thank you all very much. We come back, be joined by Susan Demas and Rick Pluta. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Welcome back. I have a horrible vision of some voters arriving at the polls and after voting for president, then being so depressed or overwhelmed by the length of the ballot, they just call it quits and head home. Let's talk about the rest of the ballot with Susan Demas from Inside Michigan Politics and Rick Pluta from the Michigan Public Radio Network. Gang, thanks both very much for being here today. Susan, let me start with you. What do you suppose are the really underrated things that are on this ballot that really haven't gotten the kind of attention that they otherwise might if we weren't so hyper-focused on the presidential race?
Well, we do have the entire state house on the ballot, 110 seats, control of that chamber, which could make Governor Snyder's next couple of years, his last couple years, unhappy, potentially, if the Democrats win.
Yeah. Rick, what do you think?
I have to agree with Susan that that's probably the big one, but it's so affected by the Trump versus Clinton race because our elections have just become so nationalized that it so much depends on the ability of the top of the ticket to turn out their base voters. And so actually, Democrats, they have to flip 9 seats in order to get control. And that's a lot of seats, even though there's a lot open. Like, I'll point out, I just made some notes. A lot of this is from Ballotpedia. A lot of this is from Susan's publication. But in the last election cycle, there were 6 competitive seats. In this election cycle, we have 14 open Democratic seats, 27 open Republican seats, which means that Republicans have more seats that they're defending. In presidential years, typically there are more Democrats turning out, which makes a difference. So there's a lot of hope there. But then again, also, some of these seats are so entrenched in one party or the other.
We've drawn the lines, we've gerrymandered these to such a degree, but let me let you both prognosticate a little bit. We've had now rather epic debates over straight ticket voting. We've got clearly discussed even a number of voters who are going to hold their nose as they vote at the top of the ballot. So what do we expect is going to be the net? What do you think is going to happen, Susan?
I think that the Democrats have a really tough haul to win 9. The last time we saw Democrats do that was 2008. That's when President Obama, in his first election, won this state by 16 points. So those were some heavy coattails. I don't think we're going to see that this year. So will Democrats pick up 4 to 6 seats? I think the likelihood of that is rather good, but 9 is very difficult. Well,
you're giving us a good little place to measure there as to where things swing on election night.
In a 110 member House chamber that in all likelihood we will see the majority, whether it's Republican or Democrat, be somewhere around 57, 56, 57, maybe 58, and it'll be determined very likely by several races decided by 200 votes or less.
We've got a couple of, I guess I would call them reliably Republican districts that I guess suddenly become in play then if things play out as Susan is suggesting. The 1st district, which is now an open seat this year up in the north part of the state, but also the Bishop-Skrelly race we've watched an awful lot of money get spent in a district that I think most Republicans would feel fairly secure as claiming is theirs. How competitive is that race, do you think?
Yeah, the race for Congress is very competitive as well. Obviously, Republicans have a huge 30-seat advantage, so it'll be very difficult for Democrats to take that, I think more so than taking the state house. But for once, we really do have 3 competitive congressional races. It's not just lip service from the Democrats. I think that both parties would acknowledge that the open 1st seat way up north is the most competitive. But there's a lot of activity going on in the 7th, which is South Central Michigan.
Congressman Wahlberg versus State Representative Gretchen.
Right. And then in the 8th, which is kind of the exurbs of Detroit, Livingston County, Northern Oakland, Lansing, the Ingham County area. That's suddenly,
Bishop race that
right, Bishop and Scully, that's really heated up.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that attention on that from both parties has ramped up in recent weeks, and a lot of that, you know, we were talking about the phenomenon of more Democrats turning out in presidential years, that Democrats are also hanging a lot of their hopes, and I would put the Bishop seat in as one of them, in you know, malaise in the Republican coalition, especially among a pretty reliable GOP voting bloc, which is college-educated white women. So, you know, that's a decisive demographic out of northern Oakland County, which is the anchor of the 8th Congressional District.
We've also got a terribly important RTA question being decided here, which I guess in the old days, I guess we would have said this is classic pitting the suburbs against Detroit. I'm not feeling that kind of vibe, especially since both Mark Hackel and Brooks Patterson agreed to kind of sit this one out. But what do we expect is going to happen there, Susan?
Well, I think they've been really organized to get out the yes vote. Everybody knows that transit has been a huge barrier to not just Detroit's renaissance, but the entire region. Yeah. But, you know, you are going to have suburban voters very reticent. So I think this could be very close.
A regional mass transit system done through executive order, a regional agreement, ballot questions has been the elusive holy grail of the Metro Detroit business community for decades. And there are a lot of people that are hoping that, you know, finally this might be resolved, and that they, you know, that the region can move toward that. Voters, though, have been historically skeptical. We'll see what happens. And
I also, as I mentioned in the last segment, Susan, we've also got what really should have been decided, at least winnowed down in a primary, when you've got 63 candidates for school board, and yet, as I said to Darcy, this group is going to have teeth. They've been largely a ceremonial sort of position for some time, but power is being given back to this board. This is an enormously important election, and yet an overwhelming slate of candidates on a general election rather than in a primary.
Yeah, pity the people in Detroit who make it all the way down the ballot and then have a glut of 63 candidates. You know, it's just
for 7 positions.
For 7 positions.
Yeah. And think about the lines on election day.
Right.
Well, sure. Yeah, this is not going to be a quick ballot to get through. Yeah.
And this is the kind of race that's just really impossible to poll.
Yeah, it is. And last thing I wanted to get to, Rick, you mentioned to me earlier, we actually have a record number of voters registered right now
7.8 million,
in Michigan. 7.8 million voters. Has a lot to do, I think, with the primary race back when we saw both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders really working to get people registered. But what are the ramifications if you got that many voters? I've only got about 20 seconds left.
The ramifications of that are that on both sides, the mechanics of get out the vote operations, the phone calls, the getting people to the polls, the reminders will be instrumental in deciding who will win and who will not win on Election Day.
All right, you've given us a lot to chew on as we watch here now with just 9 days to go before Election Day. We'll see what happens here over these next couple of days, because so far we can't go a day without some kind of development that affects it all. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being here as well. Meet the Press is coming up next, right after Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit. Have a great week. We'll see you next time right back here for Flashpoint.